Hello friends, I'm Michael Kingswood. I write fiction for fun and profit. Before we get to today's show, we have to do one thing real quick, and that's a little spot from our sponsor. Fortunately enough, our sponsor is me. In a world of valor and magic, two soldiers flee from their past. An isolated mountain town suffers under the heel of a vicious band of brigands. An offer of redemption for the one, salvation for the other, but not without great risk to both. Action and adventure await in Glimmer Vale, the first book of the Glimmer Vale Chronicles. Get your copy today, wherever great books are sold. Alright friends, it is Saturday, which means a story Saturday, and we are continuing on with reading our fiction from the stories that I wrote for last year's project. We are into Volume 2 of 52 stories in 2023, and this week we are covering a story called Tesla Collection. It's a crime story. It involves collections. It involves Teslas. It involves a bunch of other shenanigans that we'll get into here in just a second. I hope you like it. I read it. I wrote it. It's great. Talk to you when it's done. The mid-afternoon sun shone in through the dirty, long unwashed window that sat nestled in the wall next to the small round-top table where Terence sat. The light seemed to creep through a crowd of dust, illuminating the little particles as it traversed the distance from the window until it struck the once polished but now scratched and stained top of the table. His glass sat atop the bare wood of the table, beads of condensation from the summer heat gathering on its outside and slowly running down to pool at the glass's base. It would leave a ring on the table, but Terence didn't care. The table was already beat to hell, and it wasn't his anyway. The man sitting across from him seemed to care, though. His lips, framed with a beard that was more gray than brown, turned downward as he focused his gray eyes onto the glass for a moment. In that moment, Terence thought Eli would scold him, tell him to pick it up, or at least place something beneath it to preserve his meager furniture. Perhaps he had at least that much self-respect left. Instead, Eli merely licked his lips and looked back up toward Terence's face. All he could see was the cringing defeat there, even as Eli tried to keep it out of his voice. "I don't have it." Not at all surprising, or Terence wouldn't have been sent here. Still, he looked over Eli's left shoulder to the fading, yellow-painted wall behind him. The few tokens of pride that he had managed to accumulate over his life were hung there. A certificate of discharge from the Navy, some certification or other from a union Terence didn't recognize, a couple pictures of dogs, and a family photo. Eli from probably 10 or 15 years ago, slimmer, more robust, his arm around a brunette, not pretty, but not ugly, a bit below average. A girl 2 doors down type who, at least in the picture, looked happy enough to be with a guy like him. Maybe because she had few other options. Below them in the picture, a little boy and a little girl who resembled her a lot, and Eli maybe tangentially. The kids were brown-haired and happy in the way that little kids are going to be, though they were dressed in drab, probably thrift store-bought clothes. Terence glanced away from the picture toward the rest of the single wide that Eli inhabited. Not much to look at. It wasn't completely untidy, nor was it well kept. There was clutter on the little shelf in the far wall, obscuring the few books that lived there, dirty dishes piled in the sink. The front door stood open, nearly flush against the wall, while the shabby-looking screen door was pulled to. It smelled faintly of cigarette smoke, and beneath that was a musty odor, like there was mold growing somewhere, or maybe there was laundry that hadn't been done in a while. Not exactly a man of means, Eli, but that wasn't Terence's problem. He looked back at Eli and narrowed his eyes, saying nothing. Eli swallowed visibly, then looked down from Terence's gaze. "I don't." "Don't bullshit me, Eli. Payday was yesterday." Eli's frown returned, but there was no heat in it. He kept looking down at the tabletop. "Yeah." He drew a deep breath as though to steel himself, then forced his eyes up to meet Terence's. "I've got bills to pay, man. I've got family." Terence snorted. "You took a loan from Kelso. That comes first." He held his left hand out across the table toward Eli, palm up. Give. Eli's nostrils flared, and for a second, Terrence wondered if he was actually going to try to make a fight of it. But then his eyes dropped again, and he nodded. Eli pushed himself to his feet, and his chair made an off-tone scraping noise as it pushed across the worn formica of the single-wide's floor. His belly rubbed against the top of the table, beneath the stained white t-shirt he was wearing, as he rose, and he stood there for a second, breathing slowly. Then he turned away from Terrence toward the narrow hallway, leading back to the trailer's 2 tiny bedrooms and the closet that passed for its bathroom. 1 second. Terrence watched him go, his bare feet making nary a sound as he padded back to his room and slid his right hand down to the grip of the pistol he kept in an appendix carry holster behind his belt. Eli probably wasn't going to try anything. If he was the type to, he wouldn't have ever gotten as far into debt with Kelso as he had. But you never knew. The door at the rear of the trailer crashed open, and he heard rustling noises from back there. Then a short while later, Eli's frame came back into view through the door frame as he walked back forward. Terrence closed his hand on the grip of his pistol, but when Eli came fully back into the view with only a wad of bills in his hand, he relaxed. Eli sat down across and dropped the money onto the table between them. Terrence scooped it up with his left hand, his right still on the pistol. He didn't bother to count it. Eli knew what would happen to him, and to his wife and kids, if he came up short. "Not going to be able to get groceries this month," Eli said, his voice plaintive, like he wanted to make a fight of it but couldn't figure out how. "Should have thought of that before," Terrence said. He rose, stuffing the bills into the left pocket of his khaki cargo pants. "So maybe come by next month." Eli watched him as he rose, his mouth flopping open like he wanted to say something. But what was there to say? He owed, and he had to pay, and if he didn't, he'd get another visit to collect with interest. Instead, he just nodded. Terrence turned and left through the trailer's screen door. His glass of water, which Eli had poured for him, remained untouched on the table. Terrence set the wad of bills he got from Eli down on the desk in front of Tony, Kelso's collection man. Tony was short and round, and he always wore a white collared shirt and a tie when he took care of business. The tie varied in color and style, but it was always impeccably tied into a tight double Windsor that made it look like he must be choking out despite his never showing any evidence of breathing difficulties. When he accepted the wad, he took a few moments to unroll and count them all, frowning the whole time. Then finally, at the end, he nodded. "Good job. You won't be a problem in the future." Tony's dark brown, almost black eyes rose to meet Terrence's, and Terrence shrugged. "Not if you're smart." Tony didn't respond immediately, just looked at Terrence for a short but uncounted span of seconds. Then he nodded. He slipped the wad of bills into a secure case that Terrence couldn't see, but that he knew was there from previous engagements, then shifted his focus to a ledger book that was sitting open to his right atop the desk. Tony frowned for a long several seconds, then nodded again almost imperceptibly, and turned to meet Terrence's gaze. "We have a debt that's been long lingering. Long-term, high-profile client." Client. That was a cute word to use, but Terrence didn't let any amusement show. He had long since learned the folly of that. "Want to take a crack at it?" "How much?" 50, meaning $50,000. Terrence blinked. That was a lot to collect, but not unheard of. He shook his head. "No, how much do I get?" Tony blinked, then grinned a bit broader. 10% finder's fee. His brows compressed. "If you get it all." "And a partial?" "Don't do that." Terrence wanted to scowl at Tony. That was a bullshit deal, and they both knew it, except for the debt his sister had racked up, and that Terrence was paying off by playing collecting muscle for Kelso. This recovery would clear his sister and him both, and net him a good nest egg to restart his life, whether in Kelso's circle or entirely clear of him. But if he failed... Tony's mouth turned into a frown that matched the creasing of his eyebrows. "Don't argue. Just get it done." Terrence very much wanted to argue it, but from the look on Tony's face right then, he knew that would only end in a result that he would regret. Forever. "Okay," he said. Tony's frown turned back up into a smile. Brandon Lafrange Camolo was a successful businessman around town, but also a degenerate gambler. He'd been placing bets with Kelso for years, on the sportsbook, the races, even on the results of political campaigns, and he lost more than he won by a large amount. But he had a successful small business supplying landscaping services to homeowners associations all around the metropolitan area, so Kelso knew he was good for it. So he had extended Camolo a line of credit, at an interest rate closely matching the legitimate market rates. Because why bleed a stone dry if you don't need to? Except the real estate market had taken a turn for the worst in the last year and a half, and from what the newspapers said, a bunch of HOAs had begun tightening their belts, hiring landscapers once a month or once every 2 months, when before they had been coming every week. That meant Camolo was facing a cash flow crisis. At first he kept up with his payments to Kelso, but lately that had changed. He'd come up short 4 times in a row, so now it was time to collect. As Terrence drove to the 2-story office building adjacent to a cookie-cutter strip mall, which housed Camolo's landscaping business offices, he pondered what tack to take. On the one hand, Camolo was a legit guy, so he couldn't strong-arm him too bad, or he'd just go to the cops, which would make everything more complicated for everybody, especially for himself. Kelso also had deniability. Nothing was in his name legally. Terrence, on the other hand, he couldn't just go barging in there, guns blazing, and demand Kelso's money. That would just land him in the clink, and Kelso pissed at him. So he had to look at the other hand. And that hand was less savory, the kind of play Terrence didn't care to make, unless he had to. It got too emotional, and emotion was bad for business. Most of the time. This time, as he sat in the parking lot of Camolo's business, and watching the comings and goings of people throughout the afternoon, he strained his brain to figure out a non-emotional, merely business-like way to get the collection done. He would, of course, approach Camolo and ask politely, but if that didn't work, the non-emotional options were all coming up blank in Terrence's mind. Damn it, he said, as he took a gander at the building through spyglasses that looked just like opera glasses, mainly because they pretty much were opera glasses, and spied a man matching Camolo's height, weight, and complexion leaving the building and walking toward the executive parking spots at the front of the lot. He had to go for it, see how it'd play out. Who knows, maybe Camolo would just come through with the cash. He had plenty he could draw from, after all. Camolo got into a black Tesla, of course he would drive one of those, douchebag as he was, and pulled out of his reserved parking space, turning toward the parking lot's exit. Terrence put his car, a real car, not an overhyped ego-mobile, into drive, and turned to follow him. Terrence wasn't at all surprised when Camolo turned into a Whole Foods, and then pulled into a handicapped spot near the front of the store. He hadn't exhibited any difficulty when he walked out from his office building to his car, nor did he seem to require any effort at all to get out and walk the 30 paces from the spot he had claimed to the supermarket's door. When he came back out, pushing a cart full of fruits, vegetables, and other super-healthy foodstuffs, he didn't show any trouble whatsoever loading his items into the Tesla's trunk. But he did have a handicap placard hanging from his rearview mirror, and as he drove away from the spot he had taken, he hadn't even bothered to put his shopping cart into the cart queue adjacent to his purloined space. Camolo had a satisfied grin on his face. Terrence decided then and there that whatever misgivings he might have had about trying to collect from him were misplaced. He deserved everything he was going to get, and more. 3 days of following Camolo around left Terrence with a decent feel for his routine, and it was routine. Out of the house at 7:30 every morning, to the office by 8, leave the office at 1700, home by 1800, no departures until he left for work the next day. If he needed to hit the grocery, he did it on the way home, as in the first day Terrence observed him. His wife handled all the kids' activities, so really Camolo was a work-and-home man, little more. Made it tough to figure out a good place to confront him, without either putting his back up into a fight for honor mode, like as if his wife or kids saw it, or doing it in a place where dozens or hundreds of people could see. In the end, Terrence decided to wait until he went to Whole Foods next, get him in the vegetable aisle. No one ever expected the vegetable aisle. He chuckled over the admittedly bad joke as he followed Camolo into the Whole Foods parking lot 4 days later. Some of his humor left him when he saw Camolo take the same unnecessary handicap spot he had the first time Terrence observed him. But then he turned toward the rear of the lot to get his own spot. He took a moment to smooth his emotions into the detached professional mood he preferred for his interactions with debtors. Then he got out of his car and strode into the Whole Foods. Camolo was already well inside when Terrence entered, and it took him several minutes to find the beaten and crippled man, except he was standing straight upright in a posture that denoted strength and confidence, in a charcoal gray 3-piece suit with a navy blue and white striped tie. His black shoes reflected the overhead lights like mirrors, As he pushed his partially filled shopping cart past the bulk food bins in the center of the store, a whimsical smile on his face. Terrence had a cart that was almost empty, just half a dozen bottles of wine and some jars of spices that he really needed to restock his kitchen with anyhow. So when he turned down the bulk food aisle beside Kamolo, it was easy to maneuver ahead of him and then turn sharply to the right, cutting him off. "Hey!" Kamolo exclaimed as Terrence's cart struck one of the bulk food barrels directly in front of him. Terrence put on an apologetic smile and turned toward him. "Sorry," he said, "the wheels on this thing are all jacked up." "Yeah, well, watch where you're going," Kamolo said. "Sure thing, Brandon." Kamolo was beginning to maneuver his cart around Terrence's cart, and Terrence himself, but stopped himself cold when Terrence said his name. "Do I know you?" he asked, his tone wary. He looked Terrence up and down quickly, as though taking his measure. Terrence had put on business casual clothes, so he had looked like pretty much any suburban yuppie schmuck at the first glance. He put on an ingratiating smile that would go well with his attire. "No, Brandon, but I know you. Or rather, Kelso does." Kamolo's eyes went wide and his jaw fell open. "You owe, and you've not been paying, so Kelso is calling in your debt." Kamolo's eyes darted left and right, fright showing through, but then that fright left as he cleared his throat. Not completely, but mostly, which was more than most could do. He put on an expression that Terrence assumed was supposed to be one of cold business. It mostly worked, except that his eyes kept dancing from side to side for a moment, even as he leaned in and replied, his voice low. "He can't do that." Terrence snorted. "You made a contract, establishing payments. You haven't kept up your end. You've been coming up short. Since you are in breach of contract, Kelso wants it all." He furrowed his brow menacingly. "Now." "I don't have that kind of money on me now." Unlike with Eli, Terrence believed him. The amount was much greater, and who walked around with 50 grand on him? No one, in reality. "Back here in 2 days. Don't be short, or you won't like the result." Before Kamolo could ask what he meant, Terrence turned his cart around and strode down the bulk food aisle, away from him. Terrence expected not exactly a fight, but certainly pushback when he met up with Kamolo 2 days later. He did not expect the man to smile broadly and walk up to him as soon as he stepped into the Whole Foods bulk food aisle. "Hello, Brandon," Terrence said, keeping his voice neutrally calm, despite the questions that were racing through his mind. He didn't seem the type to just roll over, and if he'd been able to pay so easily, but stiffed Kelso for so long, what was going on? Kamolo's smile remained steady. "I decided you were right. I haven't done right by Kelso, and he's not the kind of guy I want mad at me. Made sense? So here." He held up his left hand, palm up. A key fob on a ring was cradled in it. Terrence saw the Tesla logo on the side of the fob. "What?" He couldn't keep the confusion from his voice. "Tell Kelso he can have my Tesla. He already has a car." Kamolo snorted. "I presumed so. Look." He glanced left, then right. No one was nearby. "It cost me $85,000. You guys ought to be able to get 50 for it, no sweat. And then we're even. And you collect the insurance money." Kamolo's eyebrows rose. "Do you really care? Kelso gets his money regardless." Terrence had to think long and hard on that one. He didn't care himself either way, but the added trouble of having to sell the thing via chop shops or whatever would reduce the amount Kelso got for it, which would reduce Terrence's cut. So yeah, come to think on it, he did care. All the same, there were more and more of these stupid things on the road every day. Demand seemed to be high. Maybe Kelso wouldn't take much of a loss on it after all. And if it cleared the matter up nice and easy, what the hell. Terrence snatched the key fob from Kamolo's hand. "If he doesn't get enough for it, I'll be back." "I'd be surprised if you weren't, but it will be more than enough, believe me." Terrence snorted and turned to go. "Drive safely," Kamolo said. He sounded of disgustingly good cheer. Terrence had never driven a Tesla before, or ridden in one. The door handles drove him crazy for a second. It took him a minute to figure out how they worked. But then when he got behind the driver's seat, there were no gauges? How was the guy supposed to know how fast he was going? But as the car powered on, the big display in the center of the dashboard to his right booted up, and he could see all the usual driving indications were there, just not where he was used to seeing them, and certainly not in a place where he could look at them naturally while still keeping his eyes on the road. Whatever, he wasn't going to keep the car forever. He was just going to bring it to one of Kelso's chop shops. Just a quick drive down the highway. Easy day, hopefully. The car accelerated more rapidly than he was expecting, and he very nearly crushed a woman and child who were walking back to their car from the Whole Foods before he figured out the sensitivity of the gas pedal. But it wasn't really a gas pedal, was it? Terrence pushed that thought aside and made his way toward the on-ramp. Half a minute later, he was cruising on the highway, impressed by the car's pickup and steering performance. He'd never buy one, of course, but it was nicer than he assumed it would be. Not $85,000 worth of nice, though, he said to himself. Just then, he saw flashing lights in the distance behind him, and the driving display went black. The feeling of acceleration eased, then faded into the slack ease of just coasting down the road. The steering wheel seemed to act of its own accord, veering him off onto the median past the rightmost lane, and then the car came to a complete halt, all displays completely black. What in the, he said, incredulity, driving his voice up half an octave from normal. But there was no answer. No one else in the car but him. Duh. Still felt like something non-random was happening. That meant someone was behind it, and it wasn't him. In the rearview mirror, the blue and red flashing of police cars were getting brighter, and he saw a pair of cruisers weaving through the traffic toward him. He didn't know what was going on, but he strongly felt the need to get out of there. Now. Terrence pulled the car door handle. Nothing happened. He tried it again. Still nothing. What the hell is going on here? He cried out and hunted around the door for the lock button. He found it after a few seconds and pressed it. Silence. No effect that he could determine. He tried the door handle again. Still nothing. He was trapped in this stupid electronic car. How was he supposed to get out? One of the police cruisers pulled up behind him and stopped. The other passed him on his left, then stopped in front of him in the median. A moment later, the cops were out of their cars, guns drawn, and pointed at him in the ego-mobile, and he realized what must have happened. Camolo had reported the car stolen, and somehow the Tesla geeks and the cops worked together to shut it down while he was driving, and even disable the doors? He watched as the cops advanced toward him and found himself shaking his head in disgust, at himself for falling for such a simple ploy, and at the car he was in for being so... He didn't even know what to call it. Then it hit him. It wasn't an ego-mobile. It was a Big Brother-mobile. Terrence laughed ironically. He had to hand it to Camolo. It was a good play. Wouldn't get him out of heat with Kelso, but still a good play. He couldn't wait to get out of prison, so he could kill the little weasel. Yeah, so when my sister bought her Tesla a couple of years back, and we were visiting, went driving around in it, I started calling it her ego-mobile, because damn things are expensive and kind of flashy, and people show off with them. But yeah, I was shocked that even the door handles were electronic. Even the door handles. There's an emergency mechanical release for them, like if you get an accident or something, but it's way too electronicized for my taste. I remember if you played the original Fallout game, the opening cinematics for it, there's an advertisement for the Corvega, and the advertising campaign is like, all analog, no computers. And back in 1997, I couldn't understand why anyone would want such a thing. But now, yeah, I'll take an all-analog car that doesn't try to drive for me or slam on the brakes when it thinks the car in front of me is approaching too quickly, or you name it. Yeah, that's all annoying. Let alone something like a Tesla where any jackass can just sort of run in, hack on in, and take control of your car and do whatever you want with it. It's, bad plan. Oh, yeah, cybersecurity. Baloney. So I'm not a big fan. I mean, they're zippy. They're fun. But, nah. So I had to throw that in the story because why not? Anyway, hope you liked it. It's kind of a fun one. They're all fun because I wrote them. But this is fun. Poor Terrence. Probably won't do that much time, right? The store cameras probably from Whole Foods probably will show them Camilo willingly giving him the keys. Maybe? Nah, he's probably screwed. Nah, maybe not. Probably won't visit him again, though. It was still fun. So, that was this week's story. You liked it, I'm certain. If you didn't, well, I don't know what to tell you. Sorry. But you will like next one. Next week is we're revisiting our good friend Dustin Cofield, the elf exterminator, in a story called Going Loomy in Ybor City. Everything you want. With a secret agent working for Santa in Ybor City, there's probably going to be cigars. That'll be awesome. Come back. We'll read that next week. But between now and then, a very important event is coming up on Tuesday, the 30th, at noon Pacific time. And that is the launch of the Kickstarter campaign for Warfare Qualified, the Space Navy book I've been working on for years, and that is finally about ready to give it to the world. So we're running this campaign in order to launch it properly, get some good moolah, get some interest generated, all that kind of stuff. You should swing by Kickstarter at michaelkingswood.com/ICNkick. The campaign launches on Tuesday, but you can follow it now to get notifications when it launches, so you can back it immediately. Of course, I'll be telling everybody when it launches. I'll probably do a live stream or a video event of some sort at the launch, which tends to be what I do for these things. And I'll be sending out newsletters and all that other stuff. But you definitely must come and back that campaign. It's going to be awesome. Lots of great fun stuff available for it. Lots of rewards. Cool stretch goals you got in mind. Have fun. You'll like it. The other thing you should do, of course, is subscribe to this page. Subscribe to this channel, whether you're at YouTube or Rumble or wherever. If you prefer to read, make sure you go over to Substack. Subscribe to my Substack, where we will be putting the text of these Story Saturday stories up in parallel with the videos. Two of them each month will be available to anybody who wants to come read them. 2 of them each month will be for subscribers only. Those who wish to support my efforts here by doing a paid Substack subscription will get an extra story each month as well. It's my way of monetizing and also saying, hey, thanks you guys for showing your support. You get a little extra stuff. The Subscribe Star page I set up at subscribestar.com/Michael-Kingswood is a similar setup. If you want to support with a few bucks a month, you get an extra story each month. Keeping it simple. And don't forget to tell all your buddies to go do that. If you can always, of course, go buy books. michaelkingswood.com/store or michaelkingswood.com/books to read the number 2. That will get you. The first one goes directly to my business store, and so I get more profit that way. The second one is a aggregation site where you can click on the title and it'll show you all the stores it's available. You can pick on which store you want to go to, whether it's Amazon or iBooks or you name it. So all the options in the world for your enjoyment. And yeah, I think that's it. Thanks for hanging out here on Story Saturday. We'll be back again next week for Story Saturday. And come see the Kickstarter on Tuesday. It's going to be a lot of fun.